Welcome to the Paytech Show, the show that takes you on a deep dive into the world of the payments industry. I'm your host, Doug McKenzie, and in today's episode, titled Payments Pressure, we have an incredible lineup of industry experts who will explore the challenges, innovations, and the changing landscape of the payments industry. More importantly, in this episode, we're actually going to be discussing the evolving demands of business customers and what they want from their payment journey, how large-scale payments organizations such as banks and more can satisfy these demands and help customers in this process. So to help unravel this question, we have the privilege of hosting three distinguished guests. First up in the FF studio, we have Brian Hanrahan from NewerPay EML. Brian will share his insights into the expectation customers have when it comes to their payments. With such a broad customer base, I'm really excited to find out more. Next, Ali Patterson headed over to meet Vincent Belloc from PayPal. Vincent brings his expertise in the huge hurdles facing small businesses, payments organizations grappling with fraud and the increasingly complex payments ecosystem. Finally, we have Alan McCard from MasterCard, another payments organization that needs no introduction. But let's find out more from the man himself. Get ready to explore payments pressure on the Paytech Show.
So Alan, before we go any further, could you tell our viewers who might not know a bit about you, your role here at MasterCard?
Yeah, everyone knows MasterCard as the card company that does debit and credit and prepaid payments. But we've actually got a significant role in a number of other payment offerings. The bit I don't run is real-time payment services in country, all the faster payments and the like. We actually run 14 of those, of the most significant around the world. So that's a fun fact that most people don't know. But my bit is really about money transfer, and that encompasses a number of businesses like MasterCard Send, global bill payments, payment from tokenized accounts, but very importantly it encompasses cross-border services. So that's our kind of money transfer proposition as well.
Now, cross-border payments have gone through such a wealth of changes. But before we dive into the tech, I like to begin with the customer in these interviews. What are some of the demands that you see customers starting to ask for from their cross-border payments?
It's really interesting. I think a few years ago, people would send an occasional cross-border payment. So, you know, it was clunky, but it wasn't a sort of daily irritation. Now people are consuming cross-border, they're sending money home to, particularly, you know, during the pandemic, financial pressures, migrant labor. There's just a huge growth in the amount of payments, and particularly since the pandemic, digital. So, you know, as payments domestically move to non-contact digitized payments, that's also happened in cross-border. So the expectations now are a lot higher than they used to be. Where once you've got accustomed to using something, then you want the user interface to be slicker, for example. You start comparing a bit more, so you're a bit more concerned about price. I think there are some things about cross-border payments that have been a little overplayed, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, you know, there was the big promise of DLT that burst forth a few years ago, and I still believe there is promise in DLT, but I think everyone got used to the idea that all payments were going to be instant, no matter the size, no matter the purpose, no matter what information had to go with them.
Right. Okay.
And now I think people have got a bit more specific in what they need. And so our end customers are businesses and people, and they have very different needs. Businesses, for example, might want integration with accounts payable and accounts receivable systems. People who are sending money to their loved ones might be much more interested in that payment getting there instantly because it's really needed. So there's actually a variety of requirements that we encounter from end customers, but I'd say there are a couple of things that are universal. The first, and we have this from a survey we did last year from small, medium enterprises and individuals, is security is first and foremost, and that means security of the transaction, so actually where the money is, but also security of data. That's a big concern. Speed of payment is important, as I said, more important in some instances than others, but predictability of that speed. So people know if it's supposed to land in an hour, it'll land in an hour. If it's supposed to land in a day, it'll land in a day. And then the last is, I'd say, traceability and just understanding where the payment is. So how far along is it, and then most importantly, has it actually landed? Has it been received? I think those are sort of minimum table stakes now. The G20 has focused on pain points, and it's interesting that actually cross-border payments, even in the low-value payment space, has become so ubiquitous that it became a primary thing for the G20 to focus on, enhancing cross-border payments, and their whole roadmap to do that. They've focused on speed, cost, transparency, and access. So I think that's more or less most of what it's about, but with those nuances that I mentioned.
Let's look at the fintech banks, the neobanks. What are the demands and the challenges that they have with complementing those demands that they have from their customers, from their payments?
Yeah, look, I think newer banks, or actually all banks, really have a huge amount of work that they undertake and need to undertake in order to kind of give these customer experiences that people increasingly expect. And so we all kind of increasingly expect that the best experience we have in our digital lives, on our Apple devices or other services, will now be kind of mirrored, or kind of an equivalent standard will be achieved by our banks. And that's not the way it was, or it is even for many banks. But if you look at some of the more successful neobanks, challenger banks, they're a little bit like a swan on a lake. They're pedaling ferociously on kind of reasonably complex underlying infrastructure in order to give that kind of seamless glide for the consumer. We're very much in the business of helping that kind of player operate and achieve those standards.
I love this illustration, because the front end for these organizations always seems to be so beautiful, so easy to use. But obviously, to match this high growth, the scale that they're trying to operate on at such low margins, they have to be the best on the back end too. So can I explore a bit further how you guys help these fintech banks achieve that?
Yeah, look, so a lot of what we do for for the last nearly 20 years in NuaPay and similar with EML is we kind of power their infrastructure layers. So we allow them to kind of leverage our platform, our access into schemes, and then they build their propositions on top of that infrastructure. So look, it's a kind of a balance between you are plugged into kind of clearing systems which have a certain profile, okay? So they're standardized because of the network effects you need to achieve. We try to simplify that with a layer on top, and then these clients and partners build their end customer propositions further on top of us. So that's the kind of chain, and you aim then to kind of get economies and technology simplification by operating in our part of the chain.
I want to look at the at scale, because this is something that is, whatever analogy I give for scale is going to be out of date by the time I finish saying it. Mm-hmm. So to understand the sort of scale of the task at hand, how many different reconciliation platforms or automation systems do organizations from small businesses to the big organizations, how much would they typically be using? And how costly can mistakes within this be if it's all done manually with mistakes?
Yeah, sure. I would say a lot of systems are used by SMEs at the moment. So SME are looking for all-in-one solution to create efficiencies. And if you look at how they use these systems at the moment, more than 40% of SMEs use multiple systems from the same provider, and 10% of them more than 5 from the same provider. I think there is another very interesting statistics to share, is that 40% of SMBs only use one provider to cater for all their needs. That means that 60% of them, have still, a long way to go when it comes to rationalizing the number of providers that they want to work with. Because let's face it, this is a lot of complexity that these SMEs have to absorb. Their business is to sell. It's not to handle this complexity. And if you don't do that well, it can be a very costly. For SMEs. Fraud is an example. If you look at the numbers for 2021, the fraud in the SME sector accounted for 444 million globally in the UK. In 2022, that number was 1.12 billion. So it's a very big number. So it's very important for these small businesses to really delegate and find the partner that can cater for all their needs. And for the payment provider, obviously, it's a way to retain customers and increase their revenue while minimizing churn.
I think it's something that you touched on there, because obviously there's the fraud angle, but there's also small businesses want to be focusing on what they're doing, which is selling whatever their products are. And as a small business owner myself, the amount of hours I've wasted going, where's this transaction? How is that not lining up there? That opportunity cost, I think, is something that is often overlooked and can have a major impact in how a small business is run.
Yeah, I mean, like we call that, the conversion rate, being able to deliver a frictionless experience, but not only a frictionless experience, it's an experience. If you look at different countries, you have different payment methods, right? I mean, you pay more with card in some market than others. In Germany, for example, people tend to use more their bank, to pay. If you go to a restaurant in Germany, you won't use your card, right? So when you export your business internationally, it's important to understand the whole consumer habits to be able to deliver the right experience to the consumer. Because if you don't, as you said, your conversion is going to go down. But conversion is not only a function of friction and payment choice. It's also a friction of fraud protection, right? I mean, not all transactions are equal. There are a lot of bad people out there, and you need to protect our SMEs, against these potential fraud attacks. So it's very important for payment providers to have very robust fraud protection tools in the background as well.
When sending money that quickly, how can you operate at those speeds in such a heavily regulated and almost costly industry?
Yeah. So I think it is. It's a challenging area, and I would say that I suppose first of all, there's infrastructure level upgrades that are happening kind of all over the world. Okay, so whereas the UK, has had kind of instant payments for quite a while, it's still relatively new in a lot of other regions. So first of all, are your partners and providers plugged into the right kind of infrastructure? And again, that's something we do all the time for our clients. The next parts are service models and also kind of anti-financial crime technologies, right? And that has been an area which has been quite challenging for a lot of people. So to move at this kind of pace is new. Luckily, technology has kept up, right? So if you look at kind of what's going on here in terms of computing power, so the speed of processing, also the potential to use machine learning and artificial intelligence on these patterns to identify risky transactions, has kind of in a way kept up with, I suppose, the need of the payment infrastructure. So I would say that people need to kind of modernize their technology stack, and we are kind of seeing certainly maybe a divergence here from, like, there's the major kind of global banks and the kind of leading fintechs who are able to invest at the level required to keep up with this technology change.
Yeah.
And maybe more regional banks or kind of lower tier fintechs who struggle to. And then there's the potential collaborations, which is going to, I think, be a big trend, right? So it is likely that people who are maybe subscale or want to focus on a different part of their business, maybe like lending, are going to partner increasingly with the people who are kind of centrally operating with the volumes that justify the investments in technology and operations. So that's a trend I think we're going to see more and more of, just a consolidation, I'd say, of the industry.
By now, I'm the balance guy, right? So the one thing I would say, though, is I think what you're going to see increasingly is a realization that not all payments are the same, and that the expectations around sending, dollar-euro payments around that will have a certain cost. Reaching exotic corridors will always have a higher cost to some extent. How much that's passed on to consumers we'll see, but it's just a more expensive business to run. B2B payments will have a different pathway because I think they are partly about the payment experience and partly about the integration in a corporate's overall payment and treasury needs. So I think that there's another path there. And then there are the ecosystem plays that are going on. So I've been talking about private initiatives, but the Nexus thing might happen. The multilateral interoperability of the various things that are going on in Southeast Asia could form a regional hub of instant payment systems, and I guess that would be a good thing in that region. So some of those ecosystem plays might also happen in parallel. What I don't think we're going to see is the sort of Lord of the Rings, one ring to bind them all. I think payment needs in the real world are very different. But what I'd like to see above everything is safety, trust, simplification really of choice, the whole thing just becoming a little easier to understand. That's the proposition we're trying to build at MasterCard, sort of being, if you like, multi-rail or able to process more or less anything in a way that people will trust the brand, trust the experience. But it's going to be competitive, and that's always good for customers and consumers and businesses. So we look forward to it.
The industry is heading towards really removing the payment in friction, and this is how PayPal built that fantastic business. It was all about removing friction in a way that is safe for consumers. When they use PayPal, when they see the yellow button, they know they will be protected. And this is something that's very important, in particular for small businesses who don't necessarily have the resources to handle what we talked about, all the fraud protection. This is very costly activity. So for PayPal, it's very much continue on that journey to deliver the best checkout frictionless experience and helping millions of business thrive in the digital economy. If you look at the SME market in the UK, it's 2 trillion worth of money, right, that comes from this SME market every year. And for us, it's really enabling these businesses to thrive in the digital economy.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to have to speak with us today.
No, welcome. Thank you, for coming here. It was a pleasure.
What's next for you and also the industry?
We're just really excited about kind of powering some of the great innovators in this space. So we've always operated in very much a kind of a partnership model. We know what we're good at. We love to kind of see people build on top of that. I think we're still kind of riding the wave of instant payments, open banking, embedded finance. Right, these are things that are happening anyway in the market. We're looking to power the people who are trying to do it best, and we have some really nice partnerships that are kind of achieving that. But look, we continue to kind of drive it out. It's been very interesting, since the acquisition by EML. We now have a wider suite of products, including card issuing capabilities and so on. So it's really interesting to see how these kind of different lanes in the payments ecosystem are kind of capable of converging and complementing each other, which has been quite exciting the last couple of years.
That's all we've got time for in today's episode. I want to say a big thank you to our guests. You can catch the rest of the series and so much more over at ffnews.com, of course YouTube, but especially LinkedIn, where you'll see me in the comments. Thank you very much and goodbye.